Let's look at long-term liabilities. We have two types of long-term liabilities that we'll talk about: notes payable and bonds payable. Notes payable are debt of the company. Notes payable are when companies borrow money from banks for a period longer than 1 year. Typically, you'll see 5 years, 7 years, 10-year notes payable. The accounting treatment of long-term notes payable is identical to short-term notes payable. So we will not go through it in class or here. Just review your short-term notes payable, and that is the identical treatment for your long-term notes payable. Now, if you are an accounting student, you will cover this in your higher level accounting classes. What we're going to focus on for this section is bonds payable. Bonds are long-term liabilities for a company, and they represent debt for a corporation. Bonds are issued to the public, and because of that, companies have to abide by a lot of SEC rules and regulations. There has to be an underwriter, which means a separate company buys these bonds from the company and then sells them to the public. So it's a third party who sells them to the public. The company also has to issue a prospectus to prospective bond buyers. This prospectus contains all the information necessary for an investor to make the informed decision whether or not to buy the bonds of this corporation. Now, bonds are very similar to stocks in that an investor can buy debt of the company, which is a bond, or shares of a company, which is ownership. Why would an investor prefer to buy bonds over stock? Well, bonds pay interest. That is what the return is to the investor. Bonds have interest due at a particular time. Remember, they're debt. The investor is financing the company. In addition to the interest, the bondholder is guaranteed to get back the face value of the bond, which is the amount he paid for it at the end of the term of the bond. If the investor purchased stocks, he is not guaranteed to get back the amount he originally paid for the stock. Stock prices fluctuate, and they may get back an amount that is higher or lower than the price they paid for the stock. So a risk-averse investor would prefer bonds over stocks. Also, in the event of a liquidation, which is the company shutting down, bondholders get paid back what's owed to them before the stockholders do, so they have a higher priority in the event of a liquidation. Let's take a look at what a bond looks like. A lot of times now, if you have a brokerage account, you can buy them online, so they will be kept in electronic format. But if you wanted to request a actual bond certificate to keep it with you, they will mail you something like this. Now, a bond certificate will have this information on the bond. It will have the name of the issuing corporation. In this case, it's Washington Public Power Supply System. It will have the maturity date of this bond, which is July 1st, 2015. It'll show an annual interest rate, which is the interest rate that they will pay on this bond. This particular bond has a 6.5% interest rate. It'll tell you when interest is payable. It's in the small print, but this particular bond pays interest semi-annually on January 1st and July 1st of each year. And then it will tell you the principal amount of the bond. This particular bond is for $5,000. On July 1st, 2015, Washington Public Power Supply System will pay the holder of this bond $5,000. Pause this video and take a minute to read this question. It says Valley Company issued 5-year 6% bonds with a $100,000 face value. The bonds are dated on January 1st, 2012 and call for semi-annual interest payments on July 1st and January 1st. The bonds are issued at par. Valley Company accounting year end is 9/30th of each year. What is the face value of the bond? The face value is $100,000, and that is the amount that the investor will get paid back on maturity date. What is the maturity date? The maturity date is 5 years later because it says they issued a 5-year bond. So the issue date is January 1st, 2012, which means the bonds will be paid back on January 1st, 2017. What is the interest rate on the bond? The interest rate is 6%. However, remember interest rates are always stated in annual terms, and since this bond pays an interest semi-annually, you need to remember that each interest payment will be half of that, which is 3%. When is interest paid? Interest payments are made on July 1st and January 1st of every year. Now, let's take a look at something that you may not have heard of before. It says the bonds are issued at par. Whenever they say that the bonds are issued at par, it means that we are issuing the bonds at face value. So if an investor wants to buy $100,000 worth of bonds, they will only be paying $100,000 for them. There are situations where a company will issue these bonds at a higher price, so they will issue them for $110,000 maybe, or at a lower price, which is maybe $95,000. However, we will not cover those situations in this accounting class. That will be a discussion for higher level accounting classes. Let's take a look at a timeline next for this particular bond. We are issuing these bonds on 1/1/2012. When we issue the bonds, we receive $100,000. Now, over the next 5 years, every 1st of July and 1st of January, we are required to pay interest. Let's calculate that amount of the interest. So interest that we need to pay is equal to the face value, which is $100,000, times the stated interest rate, which is 6%. However, remember, since we pay interest semi-annually, we need to prorate it to 6 months interest. So we can divide that by 12 to calculate the monthly interest and multiply it by 6 for the 6 months. That gives us $3,000 of interest every 6 months, which means every July 1st and January 1st, we had to pay $3,000 until the maturity date. The maturity date is January 1st, 2017, which is 5 years later. On that date, we also have to pay back the face value of the bond, which is $100,000. The next set of videos will talk about the accounting treatment of bonds payable.